Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Woven English. Today, let me take you from a quiet town in the Balkans to the crowded streets of Kolkata, where one woman would spend her life beside the poor, the sick, and the forgotten, and become one of the most recognized symbols of compassion in the world. Before we begin, think about the smallest act of kindness you can imagine. Maybe it is holding the hand of someone who is afraid. Maybe it is sitting beside a person who has no one left. Maybe it is simply looking into a stranger's eyes and saying, "I see you. You matter." These actions seem almost too small to change anything. They cost no money and require no special talent. Yet one woman built her entire life around moments exactly like these. And somehow, those small acts carried her farther than anyone could have imagined. She became known across the world as Mother Teresa. But that was not the name she was born with. And the path that turned an ordinary girl into a glow symbol of compassion was far more difficult and far more complicated than it first appears. She was born Anjeza Gonca Bojakshiu on August 26, 1910, in Skopje, then part of the Ottoman Empire and today the capital of North Macedonia. Her family was Albanian and deeply Catholic, living in a region shaped by different religions and cultures. Long before the world knew her as Mother Teresa, she was simply a young girl growing up in a close family, unaware of how far her life would eventually take her. Her father, Nicola, was a successful merchant known for his generosity. He often welcomed strangers into their home and taught his children a simple rule: never enjoy what you have without sharing it with others. For young Anjeza, kindness was not something discussed in theory. It was something she watched her family practice every day. When Anjeza was only 8, her father died suddenly, leaving the family shaken and financially uncertain. Her mother, Dronophile, was left to raise 3 children with little support. The loss changed their lives overnight. But instead of allowing grief to close their home, she worked to support the family and continued helping neighbors who were poor, sick, or alone. Anjeza watched her mother closely. She saw a woman who had lost her husband, faced hardship, and still chose generosity over fear. Instead of closing the door to others, Dronophile opened it wider. That example stayed with Anjeza and quietly shaped the kind of life she would later choose. By the time Anjeza was 12, that example had begun to grow into something deeper. She felt a quiet but persistent calling toward a religious life, a belief that her future should be devoted to God and to serving others. At first, it was only a feeling. But as the years passed, the feeling became harder to ignore, until it eventually demanded a choice that would change her life forever. At 18, Anjeza made the decision real. She left her family, her hometown, and everything familiar behind to begin religious life abroad. It was a journey with no easy return. She could not have known then that leaving home also meant she would never see her mother again. Her first destination was Ireland, where she joined the Sisters of Loreto in Dublin. There, she began learning English, the language she would need for missionary work in India. She was far from home, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and customs, but she focused on preparing for what came next. After only a short period in Ireland, she was sent across the world toward the place that would define the rest of her life. She arrived in India in January 1929, still a teenager. Kolkata overwhelmed her with its heat, noise, crowds, colors, and unfamiliar smells. For a girl raised in the Balkans, it felt like another world. Yet, this strange and crowded place would soon become the center of her life's work. She spent her first years in India as a novice with the Sisters of Loreto, learning the discipline and routines of religious life. When she took her first vows, she chose the name Teresa, inspired by Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, known for serving God through small acts of love. Soon after, Sister Teresa was sent to Kolkata, where a very different chapter of her life would begin. For nearly 20 years, Sister Teresa taught geography and history at a girls' school in Kolkata. She became a respected teacher and eventually headmistress. From the outside, her life seemed settled and secure. But beyond the convent walls, another world was waiting, one filled with hunger, sickness, and suffering. Outside the convent walls, Kolkata was suffering. Families slept on sidewalks, children begged for food, and the sick often had nowhere to go. The Bengal famine of 1943 made the misery even worse, killing millions and driving desperate people toward the city. Sister Teresa could see and hear that suffering from inside the convent, and the distance between her safe life and the streets outside became impossible to ignore. On September 10, 1946, during a train journey to Darjeeling, Sister Teresa experienced what she later called the call within the call. She became convinced that she must leave the convent and serve Kolkata's poorest people directly. Not from behind a wall, but face to face, beside them in the streets. It took nearly 2 years for Sister Teresa to receive permission to leave the convent. In 1948, she finally stepped outside its walls and exchanged her religious habit for a simple white sari with blue stripes. She had little money, no organization, and no clear plan. She carried only one purpose: to live among the poor and serve the people everyone else had forgotten. She began in one of Kolkata's poorest neighborhoods, where children sat barefoot in the dirt. With no classroom, no books, and no blackboard, Sister Teresa picked up a stick and started teaching the alphabet on the ground. She had almost nothing, but she had begun. Those first weeks were among the hardest of her life. Inside the convent, she had known safety, food, and companionship. Now she faced hunger, uncertainty, and loneliness. At times, she felt strongly tempted to return. But she stayed. Day after day, she continued, walking through the slums, teaching, helping, and trusting that the work would somehow grow. Slowly, she was no longer alone. Former students and volunteers began joining her, drawn by the work they saw in the streets. What started with one woman and a stick in the dirt was becoming something larger, a small community ready to serve beside her. As her work grew, Sister Teresa became increasingly drawn to people who were dying alone in the streets. She saw men and women weakened by disease, hunger, and neglect, often with no family beside them and nowhere to go. Many were too poor or too sick to receive care. For Teresa, their suffering revealed a deeper problem. They were not only dying, They were dying as if no one knew they existed. In 1952, Mother Teresa opened a home for people dying on Kolkata's streets. Many could not be cured, but she believed they should not die abandoned. There, they were washed, fed, comforted, and given one final gift: the dignity of knowing that someone cared. The Missionaries of Charity soon grew beyond that first home. Mother Teresa and her sisters cared for people with leprosy, abandoned children, the sick, and the desperately poor. New centers opened across India and then around the world. What had begun with one woman working almost alone in Kolkata had become an international mission. And Mother Teresa herself was now known across the world as a symbol of compassion. Years of relentless work eventually took a heavy toll on Mother Teresa's health. She suffered heart attacks, battled serious illness, and became physically weaker with age. At times, she tried to step down from leading the Missionaries of Charity. But she continued serving almost until the end. Her body was failing, yet the mission she had begun decades earlier was still growing around the world. By then, Mother Teresa was known around the world, admired by millions as a symbol of faith, compassion, and devotion. But behind that public image was a secret almost no one knew. After her death in 1997, private letters revealed a struggle she had carried for decades, one that changed how many people understood her life. The letters shocked many people. The world expected the private words of a woman filled with certainty and an unshakable sense of God's presence. Instead, Mother Teresa wrote about emptiness and silence. For nearly 50 years, Mother Teresa lived with what she called the darkness. She often felt no comfort, no clear answer to her prayers, and no sense of God's presence. Yet every morning, she returned to the streets, cared for the suffering, and continued the work she had chosen. This was the great contradiction of Mother Teresa's life. To the world, she became a symbol of faith, love, and certainty. Inside, she often felt only silence. Yet she did not stop. She kept serving the poor, holding the dying, and building her mission without the comfort she once believed would guide her. Perhaps that is what makes her story most powerful. Her strength was not that she never doubted. It was that she kept going even when certainty disappeared. She continued showing up, serving others, and doing the work without knowing whether comfort or answers would ever return. Years earlier, on that train to Darjeeling, Mother Teresa believed she had received a clear call to serve the poorest of the poor. She answered it by leaving safety behind and stepping into the streets. Then came decades of silence. No reassurance, no certainty, yet she continued. The call may have faded, but the choice she made because of it remained. Your English journey may have its own quiet stretches, days when progress feels invisible, words come slowly, and you wonder whether you are improving at all. Mother Teresa's story reminds us that not every meaningful journey gives immediate proof that we are moving forward. You do not always need to feel progress to be making it. Some journeys are built quietly through repetition, patience, and the decision to continue when nothing seems to change. Progress is not always visible. Sometimes, the deepest strength is simply showing up in the dark and taking one more step anyway. Before we end, Tell me what stayed with you most. Was it the young woman who left home and never saw her mother again? The people who were given dignity in their final hours? Or the private letters revealing decades of silence behind a life the world saw as certain? Share your answer in the comments. This is Woven English. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. There are many more stories waiting for you here, and I hope each one helps your English grow a little stronger. Until next time, take care of yourself, keep moving forward, and never stop learning.